Good morning. I'm partly just going to talk nonsense for 5 seconds while the people who are loitering in the corridor come in. And gradually the mic sound will rise and then you might pay some attention to me. Hello. Good morning. My name is Tim King. I'm editor of something called European Voice. I mean, it's a newspaper. But if you don't know about European Voice, we hope that you will do someday. The idea of today is that we involve people. And you and the people in the sort of Twitter sphere out there are the people who are to be involved, along with some fairly familiar faces. I want to do a bit of housework. The first thing, I think, is to work out with the technical people what level of lighting will render these screens visible. I just invite the technical people to play with the lighting, because at the moment I can't see that. Second question is, how many of you in this room have done a fire drill in this building before? Please raise your hands. A fire drill. I saw one raised hand here. Anyone else? Wave. Okay, there's two. Another one there. Three. An ex-MEP. How reassuring that he didn't become an ex-MEP by other means. Right. So take notice of those three, because they're the people you're going to follow. Slightly seriously, if a fire alarm sounds for any reason, you walk, you do not run. The advice is to go to the spiral staircase, descend one level, and then walk across the bridge and out onto the esplanade. I think actually the gathering point may be beyond the esplanade. There's another gathering point in the park outside, in the other direction. So you walk and you head across the bridge and out through the large exits. Good. Got that housework out the way. I have no reason to think that you're going to need that advice, though I'm sure the powers that be in the Parliament will take note of how often fire drills are done with such success in this building. Next question. How many people would define themselves as belonging inside this building? Please raise your hands. You're going to have to get more energetic about raising your hands, please, because of the angle of the inclination is such that I can't see you, so you have to sort of get a bit higher. So actually, it's a healthily small proportion, I would say. And how many people would describe yourselves as belonging to Brussels? Please raise your hands. Whoa, whoa. Okay, more difficult question. How many of you would define yourselves as not belonging to Brussels? Okay, is there anyone who is still asleep who hasn't raised their hand yet? There's a catch-22 somewhere in that question. Good. Okay. This event today, which will in due course, I alluded to the fact that it will feature some supposedly familiar faces. Let me be clear. There's a rule in showbiz that you don't work with children or animals. In Brussels, in my experience, it's a good idea not to work with MEPs or with European commissioners. That's my way of saying this isn't my event. It's the European Ombudsman's event. And yes, there is a European Commissioner and an MEP involved, and the President of the European Commission will be along within an hour, and so will the President of the European Parliament, who would quite like to be the President of the European Commission. They'll be along in due course. But we are basically getting you and your wish list onto the agenda before they arrive to rehearse theirs. Without more ado, I'm going to hand you over to your host, as it were, Emily O'Reilly, the European Ombudsman.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that very entertaining introduction. I'm not sure what messages I'm supposed to take from the various shows of hands, but anyway, it seemed to have the effect of waking anybody who was slightly dozing up, so thank you for that. I'm not going to speak too long because, as Tim has said, this is your event. Which is hosted by the institution of the European Ombudsman, which has nothing to do with the European Commission. It's an independent institution. I was elected last year by the European Parliament. I suppose just a few words to reflect on current events. When we were planning this particular event, which we hold annually, we were not anticipating the events which are rolling out in the Ukraine and around the world in relation to what's happening in that country. And I suppose many of the issues that they raise speak to some of the issues that are going to be discussed here, possibly, but will most certainly be discussed during the European election campaigns later this year in just a few months, and also when the fighting over the European Commission presidency happens after that. And I suppose the events speak to democracy, to the rule of law, to ideas around national identity, which are certainly very vital in the Ukraine context, EU relations with the US and with Russia, and of course with the development of a common approach around crises. And I suppose the challenge for the EU as the Council meets on Thursday and as various ministers are debating it is to how the EU positions itself. But central to all of those will be the primacy of the rule of law and of democracy on which the EU was founded. Just a few words about my own institution, the institution of the European Ombudsman, that emerged from the Maastricht Treaty in 1993, which, as you know, was the beginning or the extension of the development of the idea of a European citizenry. And I suppose some of the questions that Tim was posing to you when he asked you to raise your hands were around that idea of where people belong who are members of member states of the European Union, but also of the European Union itself. And I suppose in its simplest form, the Ombudsman was created to help to make the institutions of the European Union more accountable to you, the citizens and residents of the EU. And it was also, in a sense, to help to balance the power equation as between the small citizen and the big and powerful EU institutions. So I do that fundamentally by dealing with complaints from anybody who lives or resides or has a business with the European institution, and I also do that piece by carrying out systemic investigations into issues that go beyond the single complaint. So, for example, I could be dealing on a daily basis with anything from an aggrieved citizen who has written to the Commission and hasn't had the courtesy of a reply, to a big own initiative investigation into, for example, Frontex, which is the coordinating agency for the protection of the EU external borders. So the remit is as broad and as lengthy as that. As I said, the overall aim is to help to improve the European administration. I don't do policy as such, but sometimes the outcome of the fallout of the resolution of individual complaints or indeed of systemic investigations can feed into the political thinking and perhaps over time lead to changes if those are deemed by Parliament and the Commission and so on to be necessary. I think some of the themes we're going to see that have been highlighted by some of the people we're going to see, the young people particularly, who were interviewed on video, speak to a lot of issues that do cross my desk as well. Issues around the democratic deficit that there is much talk about. Migration, youth unemployment to the degree that I can have an impact on that, and also economic issues. But basically this institution is it's an institution for the citizens to help them to make the institutions of the European Union accountable, and my aim and my vision for my term in office is to make it a more powerful force on behalf of the citizens so that it can have an even deeper and more profound and hopefully beneficial impact on the administration of the European Union. So I'll hand you back to Tim now. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you with a microphone this time. Thank you very much. I didn't notice you answering the question that surely what the audience is wondering is, Why are you the Ombudsman and not the Ombudswoman? Who makes that decision?
I became Irish Ombudsman 10 years ago in 2003, and the first question I was asked by a journalist is, are you going to be Ombudsman or Ombudswoman? It was not something that I had contemplated. I was the third Irish Ombudsman after two men, and equally I'm the third European Ombudsman after two men. So when I was asked in Ireland 10 years ago, I said, well, don't mind, I'll answer to either. At which point the Swedish community in Ireland got very cross and wrote letters to the Irish Times, the main newspaper, criticising me for my failure to understand the word and the Swedish language, in that ombudsman is gender neutral and therefore you are a sort of the watchdog on behalf of the people rather than male or female. So I decided I would stick with the title ombudsman. The first question I was asked when I became European Ombudsman was, why do you not call yourself European Ombudswoman? So I gave the same reply. And I understand that even the women in Sweden don't have an issue with that. So that is what I am sticking to for the moment.
So your wish for Europe is that Europe becomes a little more Swedish. I thank you for drawing attention to the unoriginality of my questions, which I hope to continue during the rest of this morning. Good. You alluded to the Maastricht Treaty. This is we're still in exercise mode here. So those of you who were born at the time of the Maastricht Treaty, 1993, could you raise your hands? You didn't get that question, did you? Okay, we'll make it easier for you. Those of you who were not born at the time of the Maastricht Treaty, raise your hands. I think that's interesting. Okay, and those of you who were born at the time of the 1957 Rome Treaty, please raise your hand. Okay, and the rest of you are somewhere in between. That's quite helpful. Good. Maybe okay, and one other question. How many Swedes are there in the room? Please raise your hand. No, you've not understood. When you come to a European Ombudsman, you're all a little bit Swedish, okay? So you all raise your hand. Yes, good. At which point you alluded to some film clips. I think I'm going to ask you, I'm going to make 2 points. One is that there will be an unofficial contest on Twitter Sphere as to who has the best hairstyle during any of these film clips. So I make that point to begin with. I just can't stop that. It's going to happen anyway, no matter what I do. And these will start, I think, with clip number 1, please. And don't be distracted by people who are standing next to the person who's talking. I couldn't help myself. I'm just drawing attention to my problems. Clip number 1, please. Clip number 1 is not doing well for sound, is it? So I should basically leap in and fill in the gaps. But it's all right. She comes back in clip number... I think she comes back in clip number 6, actually. The technical people are... Right. Okay. I'm going to rely on the audience here. There's no problem. While the blue T-shirts go mad, I'm not worried by it. Good. I have another question. Now, sir, I'm pointing directly at the purple waistcoat in front of me. I can see from here that your desk number is number 20. Can you see that yourself? So that means if I called out a number, the rest of the people, you would know what desk you were. I'm just drawing that to your attention. Is that good? By the way, newcomer who's just coming into the room, there are spaces down on the sides, in the front third, on the wings, if you want to direct people who can't see that from the back. Good. Okay, so who here has already submitted any kind of wish list to the European Ombudsman? Please raise your hand. That's about 3 of you. So that leaves plenty of... Oh, another 2 have decided to... okay, so that leaves plenty of room for other people to express their wishes. So, you're all looking terrified now. Does anyone want to express any wishes I'm going to introduce a rule, by the way. The people who express wishes on Twitter have got to do it within a limited number of characters. So, and this is going to apply to questions as well during this event. If your question or your comment is too long, it'll just get dropped and ignored, as it would in the Twitter sphere. Oh, they think you have sound. But no, I'm going live now. So, number 64. Yeah, that's you. What would be your wish for Europe in, we'll say, the next 5-10 years?
Hello, this is
Go
Fernando.
on, tell us who you are and where you come from.
Yeah, this is Fernando, the Vice Chairperson of the European Students' Union. We submitted already our wish list, and we have a manifesto asking for a sustainable and accessible higher education for all the students in Europe.
Student lobby. The student lobby appears in one of these film clips. We're going to find it soon. Very good. Shall we hit clip number 1?
I think that the most urgent problem to be tackled with is the gap between the European Union citizens and the European Union governments, the people that are actually in charge of the Union. There is a huge gap between them. I mean, most people who belong in the European Union do not feel like European citizens. And so the European Union should actually try to find a way to approach these citizens and make them want to participate more in the lawmaking, the decision-making, the policy-making, and generally not be just French, Greek, Spanish, but feel European citizens and united.
I expect them to get rid of the corruption that is present in some of the eastern countries and make sure that their money is going in the right place.
I think that they need to take a more unified approach to Europe, and I think that they need to get more information out to schools in different countries about the work that the European Union does.
I expect people forget the differences relating to culture, religion, for example, economic status.
I expect them to tackle the problems of the European youth and also find out about the youth, maybe talk to them a little more and make them more interested in the European Union.
I think that in 10 years' time the European Union should be a union of equality in youth. But I hope that lots of young Europeans would be involved, as those are the future people that will be working in the EU. I also hope that in 10 years' time there will be no racism or sexism or any kind of inequality in Europe.
I think that the ideal image of the European Union would be a place with a lot of diversity and equity and tolerance between people and great accountability and credibility, and it should be a place that where people wouldn't be afraid to express their own views and to be themselves despite of their financial situation, their nationality, and be free. I think that freedom is the best word to describe it.
Very good. Thank you to clip number 1. And basically these were people, as I understand it, and as you can tell, I'm slightly frivolous. I think they were basically innocent people walking through the corridors of the Parliament who were mugged by people from the Ombudsman's office who interviewed them and asked them these questions. And you haven't seen anything yet by way of hairstyles, honestly. That's to come. Number 121. Is that a good? Is that I'm number 121 isn't looking at me. Would you like to tell me? I must admit, I'm slightly provoked by these too many young people. You see, all born after the age of Maastricht, giving me their wishes. So I'm wondering what your wish list might be for the next 5 to 10 years. I should have said, I see you listening through interpretation, that the working languages for this event are English, French and German. So please feel free to express yourselves in any or all of those 3 tongues.
Yes, but I did introduce a list. I didn't introduce a list of wishes.
No, I'm not. I'm interested in your wishes, not in any group that you might belong to introducing a list. Just you as an individual.
Yes. First of all, I was born before Maastricht Treaty, and And my wish is, the first wish is for the next European elections. It means there are a danger on the next European elections because the Euroscepticism is too strong in the polls. So I think that you need to combat and to be against Euroscepticism. It means you need Europe. It's clear. Last years showed to us that we need Europe, we need the European Union. So we need a strong European Union with better political cooperation, economic cooperation between member states and so on. So we need European, pro-European members of the European Parliament.
So your wish is for pro-European members of the European Parliament? Yeah, give me a show of hands as to sentiment in this room that would support that. Who would support that idea? Who would not support that idea? I'll try that again. Who would not support that idea? What? Yeah, there's very few people. It does. Sorry, where's the? What? 113. 113. Oh, excellent.
Good morning. I'm Anka from CBI.
Hang on. These people are not necessarily experts on acronyms.
Oh, Confederation of British Industry. Sorry.
Sorry.
Confederation of British Industry. Sorry.
CBI.
Yeah,
Okay.
CBI.
Very good.
Actually, I think that you have to have both sides present during a debate. So I'm not supporting Euroscepticism. I'm from Romania. So we like the EU, and I like the EU. But you have to have both sides, and you can't have all pro or all against the EU. You have my personal opinion. I'm not supporting the absence of Eurosceptics or their total presence.
Okay, so what for you would be the ideal number of Eurosceptic MEPs in the next Parliament?
I'm 21. I didn't have the chance to vote yet, so I can't say. Nobody can say a number, can they?
But you. You're suggesting that for the health of the Parliament there should be a healthy number of Eurosceptic MEPs, and I'm teasing you as to how many that might be. A third?
28%.
28%. That's very restrained of you. Okay.
Good enough.
Michiel, since I see you down there, and since Michiel comes from Vote Watch, so is heavily involved in opinion polling. So on the current predictions and under your analysis of what constitutes a Eurosceptic MEP, what do your latest polls tell you about how many Eurosceptic MEPs there might be in the next European Parliament?
Thank you, Tim. Well, for the last prediction we did with Watch 2014 2 weeks ago, the prediction was that the combined Eurosceptics and anti-EU MEPs on the left and the right would have 29% of the seats, and our next prediction is coming out tomorrow morning, so we'll have an updated figure then. One of the main things that's changed since then is that in Germany, as you know, there's been a ruling from the Constitutional Court that has eliminated the threshold for parties to be elected to the Parliament, which means that Eurosceptic parties in Germany, which until now didn't really stand a chance of being elected, do now stand a chance. So, although I haven't seen the figures for tomorrow yet, I would expect that that could lead to an increase in the anti-EU sentiment in the new Parliament.
So your reading at the moment is more than 29%. So number 113 from the you have to work to get that figure back down to your ideal of 28%. Yeah. Okay. That's your wish. Good. I think I'm now going to say, could we have clip number 4, please?
The major problem for the European Union at the moment is social affairs, because the Union is becoming increasingly liberal economically, which undermines workers' rights. And there I think for workers, what they need is a better economic health for Europe.
Solution to get out of crisis faster.
The economic crisis is a very difficult problem.
I would say the financial problems in Europe.
Money is the biggest problem.
I think it's the economical crisis. I think the most urgent one is economical problems, real estate markets also, and I hope they'll tackle it as soon as possible.
I think it's the problem of the Eurozone, because a lot of countries are sort of failing with their economies or struggling, and it needs to be a more unified currency at the moment.
I believe in 10 years from now there will be Schengen space everywhere, and more countries will be in the Euro space, all of the countries.
Okay. What did you think? I heard you sniggering. What did you think of that haircut? Very good. Actually, since you're there, do you have a wish list, number 18? You need to press for a microphone and... Good. Do you... I mean, as it were, that's your age group. Do you go along with that?
Yes, I would like less complaints about Europe. Everyone is saying we need more Europe and this is Europe's fault. And I think that member states should work more. And the problem with the democratic legitimacy sometimes is, I think, exaggerated. Europe is not a state. We're the union of member states. And we can do much more on the level of member states. For instance, this is up to member states to organize Euro elections during one day in whole Europe. And they don't do it. It's not up to the EU. So sometimes it's the fault of the member states. And everyone is complaining all the time about the EU. EU is working perfect. And Europe.eu website is very informative. It's much better than other governmental website of any member state.
Now you're over your 140 characters. Very good. Factual trivia point. In which European Union countries will the elections be held over more than one day? I don't necessarily know the answer to all the questions that I ask from this podium, but are there any? What country are you from? Poland. Poland. Tell me, what happens in the Czech Republic? I always form this general impression that Czechs take ages to have elections. Don't they do it Friday and Saturday? I don't know, but you're right. The website will tell you. The European Parliament's website, I'm sure that will tell us how long the Czech elections go on. Are we getting some kind of response, to my question or to other points in general? This is from the Twitter feed.
Yeah, I think it's about time we feed in some of the Twitter responses we got already. I mean, we didn't only collect tweets in the past days and weeks, but we already get quite a nice response over Twitter now. So I'm just selecting some tweets which are specifically for the Ombudsman. One is about the EU institutions. They should be a role model for the other public administrations in Europe. So what do you think about that? Then I have the feeling that the EU is ruled from another planet. There is no real democracy, says somebody. And there are some complaints from several groups, obviously, that there's too much influence of the big business on EU decision-making. What is your opinion about that? And very much linked to that issue is the question about the transparency register, where lobbyists have to register, and the question, when will we have a mandatory register?
I think you should respond.
Thanks, Gundi. Just to take the third point there in relation to the over-influence of big business, which is the view of some groupings, obviously. The role that the Ombudsman can play in that is to look at, for example, the composition of stakeholder groups, of expert groups that are formed in order to inform the Commission and other agencies in relation to various pieces of legislation that might be proposed. One of the investigations that we concluded successfully last year originated from a complaint from a group of NGOs in relation to the composition of the the stakeholder group of the European Banking Authority, which was advising them on policy. And the allegation was that the stakeholder group, too many of them came from the Western, the older European Union member states, and that also there were very few women represented. They took our recommendations on board. There is now a new stakeholder group, and they are coming back to us to show us how the principles that we enunciated as to how properly the balance should be devised has been executed by them. We will also be looking at possibly doing a systemic investigation into the composition of expert groups to make sure that the interests that are represented in those are evenly balanced, and we are looking at the ways in which those expert groups are created in the first place. In relation to the no real democracy thing, well, I mean, I suppose that is the theme of the democratic deficit is really much of the theme of this particular piece this morning, and I think it will also feed hugely into the European elections. As the gentleman there in front said, I mean, there is a role for the member states themselves to educate sounds too patronising a verb to use, but to inform their electorate of EU legislation, for example, EU regulations, EU directives. I mean, sometimes I think it suits member state governments to have their people ignorant of a lot of the work that sometimes the good work that the EU does, and when things go wrong it's very easy to point to the EU as the fall guy. I think the democratic deficit obviously speaks to a disconnect between the citizens and the governing of Europe or of the European institutions. I think people would cleave to an institution or a government over which they feel they have some influence, and if they don't feel that their vote is actually influencing something concrete and something that impacts on their lives, then naturally a lot of them are not going to feel a part of it. I suspect that the election of the President of the Commission in a few months' time or later on this year will speak to that very piece. I know the thinking around it, if you like, the narrative around it, is that if the various political groupings put forward identifiable individuals who are running for the Commission presidency, that will enable people to feel that they have a stake in that their vote in their member state will influence at some point the election or the selection of the Commission President. I think there is also a feeling that the gap is still too wide in relation to that. There is also the other point, and perhaps President Barroso and President Schulz will speak to that when they come in later, in that there does not seem to be clarity over how the Commission President will actually be selected at the end of the day. Obviously the Lisbon Treaty speaks of the Council having to take account of the voting within the European election within the European Parliament, and I suspect if you got 100 lawyers in this room, all of them would have a different view of what taking account of actually means. So it looks, from what I have observed and what I have read in Tim's publication and elsewhere, that there is perhaps a battle royale looming as between Parliament and Council in relation to this piece. But there is a conundrum at the heart of that. On the one hand, if the idea of having identifiable personalities representative of the political groupings going forward it somehow fills that democratic deficit, then how is that going to be resolved at the end, or going to be followed through at the end, if there is this big a row potentially between the Council and the European Parliament as to whose writ runs in relation to the final appointment?
On a point of information, and partly to keep you exercised, just let me check. You said if there were 100 lawyers in this room. There may well be 100 lawyers in this room. Could you please put up your hand if you are a lawyer or have studied law? Well, that's not bad. It could keep us going till lunchtime. Good. Could you also, the opinion that was voiced at the front here, that basically the problem lies with the member states, how many of you are sympathetic to that view? Could you please raise your hands? It's not half, but it's probably more than a third. Okay, and how many of you think that the EU institutions are? Did you say perfect? Did you? I think you said
I was
perfect.
teasing you a bit. Of course, it's not perfect, but administration of the EU is functioning better than the member states.
I'll rephrase the question. How many of you think the EU institutions are almost perfect? Okay, you've got the backing of about 4 very generous, merciful people. That's basically the situation. And how many of you think that there are problems with the administration of the EU institutions? That's very. Does anyone want to express a view on sort of why there is that impression around? I'm going to take your view, Madam, at the back, chiefly because you're one of the people who are that are going to be followed if there's a fire drill. So I want everyone to draw attention to where you're sitting. Right, go on.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup pour l'invitation.
Good morning, thank you for inviting me. I'm a computer expert and a physicist. I'm a convinced European citizen. I would say the European Union institutions are too far from the citizens. That would be my reproach. And if I could put a question to the Ombudsman or Ombudswoman, the European Ombudsman is not very well known to the people of Europe. The former Ombudsman, Professor Diamandouros, established a system, a network of national ombudsmen who had direct contact with the people of Europe. And those networks worked very well for him. Now, I would say this network is no longer functioning, and let me tell you why. Let me give you an example. I have a problem with a public institution, and I wrote to the national ombudsman, and he refused to do anything, saying he wasn't concerned, but before he would have been concerned. So I think this would be an idea to bring your institution closer to the people of Europe, a network of ombudsmen. So my question is, what are you going to do, and what are you doing?
Do you want to respond? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I agree that the visibility of my office is absolutely critical to its success. It can't just be known within the bubble, within the states of Belgium or Luxembourg or whatever. And one of my aims, and certainly was my stated aim when I was campaigning to be elected to this office, was to make the office more visible. And I think that the network is also critical to that visibility piece. And one of the first things I did on coming into office, and this is an exercise that I concluded the first part of just within the last few weeks, was to survey the network of ombudsmen, to look at how the network is performing, to look at the services that my institution provides to the ombudsman. And we're following that survey up with a seminar within the next couple of months of the liaison officers from all of the member state ombudsman groupings, and we are going to discuss how we can move on to the next and even more effective stage of interaction between us. Because I think sometimes there can be a lag between member state or national ombudsman understanding of what's happening in Europe, because things develop so quickly and sometimes things are quite complex. And I think the European Ombudsman needs to work with the network in relation to that, and that in turn will bring visibility to my office, and in turn my office, because of where it is sited within Brussels and Strasbourg and within the nexus of the European institutions, can bring a deeper understanding of what's going on here back to the member states.
I'm going to turn now for another film clip, I hope. Could we have number 2, please? Which is
Normally, after the European elections, we're expecting to see more anti-establishment politicians entering the European Parliament. So I think we can expect to see the European Parliament perhaps focusing more on national realities in member states. and that perhaps the new parliamentarians will be less connected with the current reality in the Union. I would expect that their voice in the national media would be more visible. We'll hear from them more often. I think a lot of decisions do come from the European level, and at national level we're not so aware of that.
With the home countries and the people they're representing.
I think it's probably the Euroscepticism that we're seeing in some nations such as Ireland and the UK, and I think that the European Union and the Parliament needs to focus on tackling that scepticism within the Member States.
Sorry, those comments are on the issue of the European Parliament and what one might expect of the next European Parliament. We've sort of already established that, though unaccountably they didn't mention this figure of a third of Eurosceptic MEPs, but we're ahead of them there, and I'm partly preparing the ground there for the arrival of Mr. Schulz. We had another group of questions on the film clip that were more to do with the address to the President of the Commission, Mr. Barroso. I think we'll quickly take that clip number 3, please.
I think there's an issue of coherence on the international stage. The European Union needs to stop speaking with 28 different voices. It needs to move in a single and strong direction.
The most urgent problem to tackle is the neighbourhood policy of the European Union.
It's Ukraine at this moment. The situation in Ukraine.
I think a standing army would be the best if we have it and we could solve our problems by ourselves.
For me, that's definitely the immigration problem we have.
Problem of irregular migration.
I think that's the immigration.
Hopefully in 10 years' time the EU will be a lot bigger and include a lot more countries, and it will be a lot more economically strong.
Hopefully with more presence on the world stage, competing against countries such as America and China and their economies.
Funny that there was a country missing in that last comment, wasn't there? Could I have a show of hands on the number of you who think that in 10 years the EU will be a lot larger? Define a lot, says somebody. A lot was the phrase used, but okay, five more. And who thinks that the European Union will be smaller? 1, 2... No, a handful. How many people would like the EU to be smaller? I think we worked out your sentiment from the velocity of your hand, sir. Very good. Okay. And who thinks it will be economically stronger in 10 years' time? That's that's more than half. And who thinks it will be economically weaker? It's not many at all. My, what a room full of optimists. Excellent. Very good. You were going to come back with more from the tweet wall.
Yeah, I have some more reactions from Twitter, and there's a concern that there's not enough citizens' involvement in the European Union. As they said before, Brussels is perceived as very remote, and there is a reference to, for example, to the ongoing trade negotiations with the United States and other important international negotiations, and the need to be as transparent as possible about it. Another tool mentioned is the European Citizens Initiative, where you need 1 million signatures to ask the Commission to propose or change EU legislation. So somebody's asking what the Ombudsman's role is in that. And another question specifically to the European Ombudsman, what about more gender balance in the European Union?
Mm-hmm. Yes, on the European Citizens Initiative, just within the last few weeks, I started a public consultation on the workings of the Citizens Initiative, asking people to bring forward their ideas on how to improve it, any problems they have found with it, any blockages in the system that prevent it working as smoothly as most people would like to see it. As you know, I think there are 2 initiatives have been approved already, one in relation to water and the other in relation to stem cell research. So obviously the next big interesting arena in relation to that will be when the Commission comes back with, after it has cogitated and mused on those particular initiatives and the reaction to that. So that's where the Ombudsman is playing its role in attempting to help the citizens work this particular initiative to their best advantage and as well as can be expected. In relation to TTIP, yes, I mean I know that there is a lot of concern around the transparency of these particular negotiations, which are obviously going to have an impact, presumably, on all of our lives. I met recently with some of the US people who were involved in those negotiations, and they were very reassuring, or at least attempted to be, in relation to how transparent they intended to be. I've also met some of the consumer groups who are part of the advisory body in relation to the EU negotiations, and they have been allowed some access into the dossier that are going backwards and forwards in relation to these. But as the US people pointed out to me, it's still very early days. They claim there's not that much to see yet. I suppose a few months down the line, when the negotiations are getting perhaps more sensitive and dealing with meatier issues, then that will be the point at which we can see how transparent they actually are. And of course, transparency is one of the big issues for the European Ombudsman, has been for the last 20 years since it was founded, and I would expect to be receiving complaints possibly in relation to those very important matters.
Sorry, I can't see your number, madam, but you're the only hand waving in that neighbourhood.
Yeah, thank you. It's 263 number.
I'll note it.
I have a question about the response on transparency. Can we discuss it further?
If we can't talk about transparency at a European Ombudsman's event, when can we talk about transparency? Is my attitude. But in the interest of transparency, tell us who you are.
I'm Sandra Koemans. I work for the European Commission in Education and Culture. Because about the discussion on the trade negotiations and transparency, my question is because I can totally understand the point of view to want to have transparency. At the same time, if you're talking about negotiations, there's always it's a political game to a large extent, or part of negotiation is in a way playing a game if you want to get what you want, and that kind of obstructs transparency at least to some extent. Could you comment on that?
Obviously there are politics involved, but when you say if you want to get what you want, I mean, the citizens have a right to know what it is exactly you want, what it is the negotiators are looking for. And I can understand in any good transparency regime there has to be that little space for that piece of deliberative process, if you like. I oversaw my own Ireland's freedom of information regime for 10 years, so I'm very familiar with these issues. But I think one of the critical pieces that is perhaps new in this debate is the fact that the economic crash that was felt so horribly by so many countries did lead to a significant decline in citizens' trust in the institutions that were supposed to be minding the money and minding them. And because there was such a wobble, if you like, such a crisis of confidence, people are less willing to trust in those institutions, those people, politicians, whatever, who are conducting these very, very important negotiations, which are going to have a real live impact on them. And perhaps 5 years ago, the levels of transparency might not have expected to be so high, but I think because of the crisis of confidence, I think there is going to be a huge demand for transparency. I fully appreciate in a negotiation you can't always show your hand, but I think the negotiators will have to live with the new reality that there is a hugely increased demand from citizens for transparency, particularly in areas of the economy and indeed regulation which have such a profound impact on the lives and the lives of their families.
Go
on. Good morning. I'm Thibault. I'm from Bruges. I have another question regarding transparency. There was actually an interesting question that was posed in the first Twitter questions, and I'm afraid you didn't answer it yet. So to avoid having a Twitter war against you, could you please elaborate on whether you think the transparency register will be mandatory sooner or later?
Well, I think I went on the record within the first month of my coming into office to say that I thought it should be mandatory. Because I think there will always be, again, taking up the point I made about the crisis of confidence of citizens in the institutions that are supposed to be looking after them. I think now people are going to be very suspicious about companies or agencies or NGOs or whatever who don't sign up to a transparency register. I think all of these things, they seem to follow the same pattern. Nothing happens, then there's a move towards voluntary transparency or voluntary registration. As ever, there are going to be people who are going to refuse for different reasons, and then we move, I think, inevitably and inexorably towards a system where it is mandatory. So that's my answer.
Do you think we've averted that war, if not others? Okay, good. On this, I mean, you talk about raised expectations on transparency. I'm interested by the question of raised expectations from European citizens' initiatives. Raise your hand if you have signed up to any particular European citizens' initiative. Okay, I'm going to sort of take. Sorry, was that? Are you? Tell me which initiative you signed up to and why.
I'm here today because I want better drug policies for Europe. At the moment, the global war on drugs is over at this moment. It's time to follow the lead of the United States and Uruguay. And we want to regulate cannabis so we can generate tax, protect the consumers, and we can exclude criminal networks.
Okay, so briefly, what's the status of the initiative that you've signed up to? How far has it got?
It's not going very far because people have to sign in with their name and their country and their personal information. And regarding the subject, people, it's a very difficult issue for people who want to change something that's illegal to sign up with their name and their full address details.
And why do you resort to a European Citizens Initiative? Do you have any real expectation that it will make a difference?
No, but we are working to make the difference. We don't expect too much from politicians, to be honest. We've been shouting in the desert for years, always the same, and nothing has ever happened. Nothing moves on any level. So we the people will do it ourselves. We are creating cannabis social clubs, and we think this is a good solution for Europe. And it's an initiative that comes from the people itself, because we are waiting too long, and we cannot wait for politicians any longer. Lives of too many people get affected by this subject.
Can I ask about other people who've signed up to citizens' initiatives? It's the why question. It's not why the individual subject matter of the initiative. It's that why you thought that a European citizens' initiative would make some kind of difference. The woman at the back.
Yes, hello, my name is Catherine Hartman. I signed on the Right to Water citizens' initiative, like another 2 million people, I believe. The reason why I did it is because it was finally, although not a legal instrument, at least an instrument that would force the European Commission to react and to act upon our will. And this subject is really dear to my heart, and I really wanted the European Commission to hear us.
Well, strangely enough, I detect a commotion to my left. I believe the Commission is with us. Good morning. This will not necessarily be how you expected to start, but here we are on the subject of European Citizens' Initiative and the expectations that they raise. Do you think the European Commission is capable of meeting those expectations?
First of all, good morning. I did not listen to all your comments because I was expected to arrive only at 10. In fact, I arrived some minutes before.
You were in good Sim Callis type time, yes. You were early, yes.
No, the point is the following, so I cannot know what objections were made. First of all, I'm here also to listen to the points you are making. I'm here not just to give lessons, but also to listen to you. If there are some things that we believe together that can be improved, I'm ready to do it. I think that in itself, the European Citizens Initiative is something that is already an improvement. Before, there were no Citizens Initiative. I'm proud that the European Commission that I have the honor to chair has done something for that. And I'm very happy about it. Now, probably I have not heard what are the difficulties. Probably it's difficult to arrange all the signatures, or it's bureaucratic in the preparation. Let's address those concerns. But I think it is important to have a European Citizens Initiative. I fought for it. It was not clear. Some member states did not want it at all. I want to tell you, they did not want it at all. We had to fight for it. Myself, Commissioner, Vice President Šefčovič, Maroš Šefčovič, and now we have it. There we have already received, as you know, one initiative. I think the second one is in the point of being received on a completely different subject, on a completely different orientation, by the way. And we are going to react to them, saying what we think. We have to see if it is compatible with the treaties. That is our responsibility as so-called guardian of the treaties. And we have to see, and in some cases we are going to follow, in other cases probably we are not going to follow, but in full transparency, if we don't follow, we have to say why we are not following. So I think it is an improvement, probably not perfect, but it is an improvement compared to the situation before, where there was not that possibility. And this is my fair assessment, so I'm not worried at all if there are some criticisms. On the contrary, I'm here also to listen to your criticisms.
Thank you very much, at which point I now have a sort of my complete set of presidents. So welcome to Mr. Barroso, the President of the European Commission. Welcome to Mr. Schulz, the President of the European Parliament. And just expect to take lots of teasing in the next few hours, weeks, on the subject of aspiration to be President of the European Commission. Good. We have been hearing from the people in the room, from people in the Twitter sphere, on the subject of their wishes for the European Union. We worked hard on the issue of what degree of Euroscepticism might be acceptable in the European Parliament. We got to about the verdict of it is tainted by the fact that this figure comes from the British CBI, the employers' organisation, but no, in an unofficial capacity. You know,
I
and you were
said
teasing.
my personal opinion.
Yes, you did. It's true. And by the way, that's number 113 if you want the personal opinion. Was about 28%, but we think the polls are going higher than that at the moment. Anyway, that's one of the issues. We have been discussing the gulf between citizens and EU institutions. We had a brief debate about the subject of whether the EU institutions were almost perfect, and there wasn't a lot of support for that idea. But there was some suggestion that the member states bore some heavy responsibilities. So let me turn to you, Mr. Barroso, on the subject of your wishes for the European Union. We're now in a situation where you've had an influence. It looks as if you will, in the future, have less influence. So perhaps that means you're more liberated to express what your wishes would be, because you don't have to fulfil them.
No. I'm a free person. I was always a free person before having this position, and I will be. I was during this position. I will be afterwards. When I was before I was in the streets of my country with 16 years of age, combating colonialism, and so I did not to have a position to feel responsible. Afterwards, to combating also the authoritarian regime in my country. And I was in the streets and in the university fighting for these more open societies and fighting for my country, afterwards joining the European Union. So I think it is important to see ourselves not because of the function we have, occasionally, because in politics, at least in democratic politics, all functions are temporary by nature, but because of what we believe. And I think my independence, my freedom of thinking will remain and was already present while I was president of the Commission. But first let me, before I start the debate, thank you for the invitation, namely our Ombudsman. It's a pleasure to be here with you and also to debate with you on your comments made by directly or online or via Twitter. Now, we are committed to transparency, and this is one of the points in my wish list to answer your question directly. The installation of European Ombudsman was a vital part of the first of this element, and it is no coincidence that it came in the 1990s when European political leaders realised the need to be more directly accountable for their actions and decisions. I think we have come a long way since then in terms of transparency, further than people realise and some are willing to acknowledge. We directly and closely involve civil society in Commission initiatives across the board, from trade agreements to fisheries policy to public health issues to reviewing copyright rules, and we are requesting the input of citizens in the public consultations we do before decisions are made. We also have set a transparency register to make sure citizens know who is involved in such decision-making processes, who is lobbying on whose behalf, on which issues and with what budgets, and that everyone knows the rules of the game are followed. Contrary to popular belief, I must say the Commission is far ahead of most other national institutions in this field, and I believe we have to play this leading role. Same with citizens' rights to access Commission documents, one of the most significant instruments in the field of transparency. The Commission handles more than 6,000 access requests a year, an increase from around 500 applications in 2002, and remains by far the European institution handling the largest number of requests for access to documents. More than 4 out of 5 requests are granted at the first stage. On top of that, the clarity and simplicity of our rules is another focal point of citizens' expectations. And rightly so, because here too a lack of transparency undermines political accountability. I have said many times that the European Union needs to be big on big things and smaller on smaller things. And we have put this principle in practice under our programme for smart and better regulation, which I launched back in 2005. We have presented 660 initiatives for simplification. We have cut administrative burden by over 25%. We have repealed more than 5,590 legal acts. We no longer have those complex and sometimes ridiculous rules on fruit and vegetable standards. And as a Commission, we have not proposed many initiatives that some lobbies, some groups wanted us to come forward. We are also trying to systematically carve out the smallest companies from legislation unless there is an proven need to include them. And we make realistic assessments of the impact of different options before coming to concrete proposals. Such proposals no longer come from Brussels only. Now, precisely as we have been discussing with the Citizens' Initiative, the citizens have the right, if their proposals are supported by at least 1 million citizens, in at least 7 member states to come with proposals. The first successful citizen initiative, Right to Water, has reached the threshold of signatures necessary last month and has already been met by both the Commission and the European Parliament to discuss its commitment to increasing efforts to universal access to water and sanitation. As you know, there was already another one, but we are still in the process of discussing with the promoters. It was already presented by 1,721,626 citizens, the initiative One of Us, on a completely different area. I think that is an initiative that more of these initiatives are going to come in the next future. We know many are already being planned. And last but not least, we have also worked intensively together with the European Parliament, and I'm happy to be in this panel also with my friend and colleague, I can say managing partner of the European Union, President of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz. So I want to make that point clear. I know that it's very common, at least in some of our countries, to present always the European Union as non-democratic. I disagree. I completely disagree. We have a legitimacy, a democratic legitimacy. The European Parliament is directly elected. The Commission is accountable to the European Parliament. The President of the European Commission is elected by the Parliament. And now, after the Lisbon Treaty, and after also my proposal, there is a bigger role for the candidates to President of the Commission, and so more accountability will be assured, I hope and I believe. And so we have an institutional democracy in Europe. We can always make it better, but we have an institutional democracy.
Let me leap in there, because you say we can always make it better. You've experienced it now you experienced it before as a member of the European Council. You've experienced it now for 9.5 years, as it were, as head of the Commission. You make it sound... You say we can always do it better, but you're basically saying it's democratic. We're getting this feedback of this perception of a democratic gulf between citizens and, well, the managing partners, as you put it. The shareholders don't seem to be terribly convinced by the board. So what would be your wishes for improving the situation?
First of all, is the point. It's politics. It's political discussion and debate. I insist, many of our prime ministers in Europe have not been directly elected for prime minister. There is no direct election for prime minister. There is election for the parliament. And afterwards, the majority appoints or supports the prime minister. There have been many prime ministers that have been never running for an election in Europe. I was prime minister. I had to win the election. But if you think in France, Monsieur Dominique de Villepin was never elected. And I could make many other cases. Or even Gordon Brown in Britain, he was elected for the parliament, but he was not elected for prime minister. Mr. Tony Blair left and Gordon Brown fought on the decision of the party, not a direct decision of the people. So this is exactly, or more or less, almost the same system we have in Europe, where we have a representative democracy. The members of parliament are directly elected. And then the Commission is accountable. My case, twice, I was nominated by the democratic governments of Europe, but I had to go to a vote in the parliament by secret vote. Secret vote. I had to fight hard because my party had not a majority. And so I believe all the instruments of democratic legitimacy were there. Now,
Is the democratic legitimacy, let me clarify this because I'm not a political scientist or anything, the democratic legitimacy that you're talking about, you think that comes from through the European Parliament or through the appointment of the President of the Commission by the European Council?
Both. Because if you are not, the democratic legitimacy, when you have, for instance, an election of the American President, it's not a direct election of the American President. By the way, it can happen that not a majority, that a majority votes and there's not election of the President, as at least it happened once, apparently. So it's the Americans elect a college of electors, and afterwards it is this college of electors that elects the President of the United States of America. And I think nobody is going to say that the United States of America have not a representative democracy.
But the remarks you make about some prime ministers not being elected, we could see a situation in Estonia in the coming weeks where one of your vice presidents may go back and become prime minister to replace Mr. Ansip, who's submitting his resignation today. If he is then the head of government, he would then be part of a European Council that would nominate the next president of the European Commission.
But is elected by the Parliament of Estonia. If Vice President Kallas now goes back, as apparently is going to happen, he will be elected by the Parliament of his country. And we have a representative democracy. I insist, in Europe there is almost no direct election of any chief of executive, probably with the exception of the President of France. That's one of the exceptions, and which does not mean that France is more democratic than, let's say, Germany.
But it's slightly more confused in a European situation where, as I tested you on this question of does your democratic legitimacy come from European Council or the Parliament?
No, for both.
And you say both. In the national situations, generally, that isn't the situation. It's clearly the Parliament.
Yes, it's true.
Do you think it would be better is it part of your wish list for Europe, and I've heard it expressed strangely enough in this House, is it part of your wish list that line of democratic legitimacy would be more clearly lodged with the European Parliament?
It's not just a wish list, it was myself, I have to remind you, that proposed that. I was the first in a European institution to make a formal proposal to have, as much as possible, a direct election of the European Commission President by the elections. It was in 2012, in my State of the Union speech in the European Parliament, that I said I hope that all political parties present their candidates for election, and that there will be an increased role of the Parliament, the European Parliament, to elect, to support the new President of the Commission. It was my proposal, and that's why this time, last time, already my party was the only one to present. I was a candidate to the elections presented by my party. No other party presented a candidate. This time, because of some of us, one other was of course Martin Schulz, as is with me, another person, but it was as President of the Commission, I took the initiative of putting that idea forward. And afterwards, last year, the Commission presented a document saying that exactly against, I have to say, the position of many of our member states. And this time, this year, for the first time ever, but already with a new treaty that gives more powers to the European Parliament, we are going to have an election where all the most important parties are going to present, have already presented or are in the process of presenting candidates to the European Parliament election. So not only it's my wish list, but I've already realised part of it, coming with some proposals for that.
And thank you for your frankness, and I'm keeping Mr. Schulz waiting on this, but Mr. Schulz has a vested interest in your answer, perhaps. Is your interpretation of how things should be now as simple that the party with the most seats in the European Parliament, if that is Mr. Schulz's party, of the candidates that seem to be being put forward for the presidency of the Commission, do you think it is as simple and straightforward that Mr. Schulz then becomes President of the European Commission?
No, I'm not going now to elaborate on concrete candidates. I'm sorry. I very much respect the candidates. I very much respect my friend Martin Schulz, but there are also other candidates. So I don't want to speculate.
It doesn't have to. No, we're not. You're talking about the theory of how it should work, and I can say whoever the candidate is of the party, whichever the party is that has most seats, should that candidate then be nominated by the European Council?
It is more complex than that, because the treaty...
It is more complex than that.
Yes.
But you're trying to bridge the gulf between the European people and this idea of some form of European democracy. It is more complex than that, is a pretty difficult response to put to the European voters, isn't it?
No, it is, but that's the rules we have. We are in a community of law. And in a community of law, you have to respect the law and the rules. And we have a treaty. And the treaty that was signed by all and ratified by all the member states that should be democratic to be member states of the European Union says clearly that there are two institutions that have a role to play in the nomination of the President of the Commission. It is the Parliament, and now I'm happy that because of some developments we are going to have for the first time probably a real European debate. In the past there was not, but also the European Council. The European Council has also some competences, and it's also a European institution. So we have to respect the powers and competence of all the institutions. But a point I'd like to make, because answering your concrete question I could not yet, because afterwards it became a little bit technical on political science, probably because of it's my fault. When you say about the gulf between institutions and citizens, that's a point that's perfectly true. My answer is the following. More than the rules, what is more than institutions, what counts is politics. The reality why we don't have today European democracy more, that people feel closer, is because we don't have real political parties at European level. Because there is not a real political debate at European level. Because the main polity in Europe is at national level. Citizens feel the European Parliament very distant. The European Parliament has all the formal legitimacy. That's not what the Constitutional Court of Germany thinks, by the way, but that's what I think. The European Parliament has all the formal legitimacy, and the Commission also. But it's true that the political legitimacy of having this involvement, the European public space does not exist. I can give you many examples. We have European parties in Europe that say one thing here in this hemicycle or in Strasbourg and say completely the opposite thing in the capitals. The opposite. So we have created political parties at European level, but they are not yet a real political reality. So for a citizen, even for us that work every day in these institutions, sometimes it's very difficult to understand what a political party says, because they say one thing in the capital, they say another thing in the European institutions. You see? This is the real problem. So the solution for Europe, contrary to what people believe, it's not just institutional engineering. We can always improve it, it's okay. Or it's not about new treaties, it's about politics, about the need to have a real political debate, to understand where the positions are. And this is the reality, is that most of our media in national terms, they put the news about what's going on in the national parliament, what the government says or does not say, every kind of story, but you don't see many news about the European Parliament. Only if there is a kind of a scandal, only if there is a divisive issue, and then usually the media presents it as something negative coming from Strasbourg. Usually there is not a real public space, and that is the only way to bridge the gap, is to have a political debate and the society involved in the politics at European level, and not leave only the European debate for the European institutions in Brussels or in Strasbourg. The political debate has to be at national and citizens level. That's why this election is important, and that's why I think the improvements we are now making are in the right direction, but let's be honest, they will not deliver from one day to the other what we would like to have.
Mr. Schulz, I could invite you in on particular points of that, but I think that would be unfair to begin with that. Tell me, I'm going to ask you a good neutral question, which is a real effort for me. I'm not very good at neutral questions, but a good neutral question. What is your wish list?
What is mine?
Your wish list for Europe and for the improvement of political democracy.
It's a question of time to answer to your neutral question. I have a very long wish list, as citizens obviously have as well.
But you can control this. You're more used to wielding that than I am. So you carry on.
We must regain trust. The biggest problem of the European Union is that citizens have lost trust into national and European institutions. My central wish is that we achieve to regain trust in the capacity of national and European Union institutions, because the Union includes communitarian institutions and national institutions, and both have for European for the development of the European Union a high responsibility. And therefore my wish is that we stop what I call the blame game. Success here in Brussels is nationalized. When something happens here in the Council, I listen to 28 national so-called debriefings, which are press conferences of the prime ministers and the chancellors and presidents. And in case of success of an agreement in the Council, you can listen in 23 official languages of the European Union the same sound. I achieved for my country. In case of failure, it is the incompetence of the European Union. The same people are declaring their failure as a failure of Europe and their success as their private national failure. This is a blame game which is destroying the spirit of Europe. I would prefer that we end, because one of the results is that citizens are losing trust. Trust in European institutions, by the way, also in national institutions, while this style is a trick. A lot of people understand quite well that it is at the end the same body, the European Council of Heads of States and Government, which is declaring itself as the government of Europe. And I raised in the Council a question. José Manuel was present. I said in every Eurobarometer we see that the approval of the European Union is decreasing. And you declare yourself here, the 28 heads of states and government, that you are the government of Europe. Have you something to do with the decrease of the popularity of the European Union? If you are the most powerful institution, the most powerful body, and the popularity of the European Union is falling, is that concerns that you, or only me and Barroso? I got no answer, but the atmosphere in the room was quite clear. That's perhaps a reason why I will not longer win a popularity prize amongst the heads of states and governments, this is for sure. My second wish is that we take what you discussed just with José Manuel, that we take it serious. My experience, I'm 20 years a member of the European Parliament. I was a long-time chairman of a parliamentarian group. Now the President of the European Parliament. My experience is wherever I am in Europe, the message of citizens is, in Brussels people rule. In Brussels people interfere directly in our daily life, but we have no say on it. We are not involved. Nobody is discussing with us, and we have no direct influence. And one of the consequences in the debate of the Lisbon Treaty was that the appointment of the highest executive post in the European Union, President of the European Commission, should not be longer a backdoor, a backroom deal. For the time being, and José Manuel knows that I was his strongest opponent when he was for the first time appointed, and also for the second time. That the heads of states and government agreed and made a suggestion to the Parliament. The Parliament could say yes or no. Now we took the consequence, and the political families in Europe, the European Social Democrats, the Liberals, the Christian Democrats, the Greens, the United Left, all appointed candidates. And last week, my party appointed a candidate with the support of 11 prime ministers present, who said, this is our candidate for the presidency of the Commission. And I think the PPE will appoint during the weekend a candidate, and there will around 11 prime ministers be present saying this is our candidate for the presidency of the Commission.
12.
My 11. or 12, meinetwegen 12. I think they have 11, but if you count so carefully, thank you very much for the information.
No, I could be wrong.
Yeah, you are wrong, I think. 12 are on our side. We are, for the first time, I think, stronger than the PPE since 20 years. But I don't know, 11 or 12, whatever. They are there, and they say this is our candidate for the presidency of the Commission. And now, my recommendation and my wish is we should not present candidates who run all over in Europe, presented with the support of members of the Council as candidates. And after the election, the same people say, yeah, you're okay, candidates, but we will choose now another. I think no other will have a majority in the European Parliament, that's for sure. They can choose another people, but he will or she will find no majority in the European Parliament because these parliamentarians who are coming to the next European election are running together with these candidates. And this is an enormous step forward in my eyes to involve citizens directly because, and if we have now a presidential election or a parliamentarian election or whatever kind of election to appoint the highest executive post on a national level, on a regional level, on a local level, it is always the same procedure. If it is a mayor, if it is a regional president or a prime minister. It is not important which kind of constitutional system you have. The reality is there are candidates with programs running for the post and presenting themselves with their proposals to citizens. And citizens vote. And they see my vote matters. If you appoint the mayor of Brussels, you have different candidates. They present themselves to the citizens. If you have a prime minister in a Bundesland in Germany, he is running, 4 or 5 persons running with their programs against each other, public debates, and citizens vote. And if we go in Germany, for example, recently, out to the streets, nobody says, as we do it for the time being for the European Parliament, we go to the streets and say to citizens, please vote the European Parliament, this is an important institution. Imagine you go to the street in Germany and say, bitte wählen Sie den Deutschen Bundestag, das ist ja eine wichtige Institution.
Please vote for your own parliament, it's an important institution.
Gaga oder wie? You go to the street and say, one moment. I have a long wish list, but the most important point I have to elaborate. Nobody goes to the streets and says, please vote the Bundestag. People are called upon to vote for Angela Merkel or Per Steinbrück, for the SPD or the CDU, for a candidate with his party. Nobody in Portugal said, vote please l'Assemblea della Repubblica. People were called to vote for Barroso or for Guterres in this time. What is the normal case in national democracy, parliamentarian democracy? That people with programs are running in a concurrence each other to get a post is on a European level a revolution. That shows how far we are with democracy in Europe. This lack of democracy is the biggest problem and the biggest chance to overcome this gap between citizens and the European institutions, this mistrust. Therefore, my recommendation is if we dare now to run with candidates, not who has the most seats in the parliament. In this parliament, no single party will have an absolute majority. You need always coalitions. We have 7, I fear soon 8 parliamentarian groups and 30 non-attached members. You have to create a coalition in the parliament. And those candidates who get a majority of members behind them, or the candidate who gets a majority of seats in the parliament behind them, no single parliamentarian will get alone a majority. You need a combination. And the candidate, he or she who will get a majority in the parliament, should be appointed after the election by the council. Or the council, or members of the council, send candidates to the streets, making an appeal to citizens, vote for me and my program, and afterwards the council says that, yeah, thank you very much, it was an interesting exercise, but we do what we did always, we decide behind closed doors. This is a real risk. Therefore, my wish list is more involvement of citizens in the European election to appoint the man or the woman who has the highest influence. That's what I know, because I know Mr. Barroso is a very modest man, but a high influential one. And to vote via parliamentarian election after a vote of citizens the next president of the Commission. This is whoever may be the person who gets a majority in the parliament. This is an enormous step to overcome this gap between citizens and institutions.
Let me just. You say it's a revolution. What do you say if? How will you explain this? How this revolution, if it does, as a lot of people expect, if the EPP does anoint Mr. Juncker at the end of the week, how is it that the revolution would then produce candidates from currently the three main parties, who are all, as I cynically put it, all within a 200-kilometre triangle of each other? That won't look to the citizens of member states outside the founding states of the European Union. That won't look like much of a revolution, will it?
I'm really surprised about that question. This is a little bit like people who are asking me, how can you run? You are German. If you identify the place where I live as the most important item in my life, thank you very much. I will try to convince citizens with my program and not with the birthplace or my home address. It's slightly more complicated than that. It's the fact that the people are voting on a list of candidates from their home country, from an electoral list which is specific to the country, and you are bolting on to their particular choice some candidates, 3, 5, 7, we don't know how many, who are not actually people that they're going to vote on. They're going to vote on the list of candidates for the European Parliament. And you're bolting on a bunch of names of people who are in utter other places for a different institution. Is your wish that eventually you have a separate direct election for President of the European Commission? It was surprisingly the German Christian Democratic Party who suggested on the last Congress, the party of Angela Merkel, to have a direct elected European president. It was not my party, it was surprisingly the party of Chancellor Merkel. There is, amongst the 28 member states of the European Union, one single country which has a direct elected head of state. It's France. All the other 27 member states have the same, more or less the same procedure. Citizens vote parliamentarians, parliamentarians vote a prime minister. So it is not surprising that we try to get the same system on the European level. This is already a progress. I think parliamentarians are running now as candidates in their respective regions after the congresses of the different parties, the Liberal Party, my party, the PPE, to support specific list leaders or Spitzenkandidaten, I don't know the English term for that. So a candidate of the European Parliament, let's say in Poland, from the European People's Party, will present himself as a candidate and saying, I support Juncker in the European Parliament. This is, by the way, in a federal system like my system in Germany, where I'm at home, quite normal. Angela Merkel is a candidate in one circle, in one constituency, and she is on a list in one Bundesland. In all the 15 other Bundesländer and the 298 other constituencies, she is not a candidate. She is one candidate to the Bundestag. She is elected as a member of the Bundestag, and then the Bundestag votes a chancellor, like always. And this is the same. And all the candidates from the Christian Democratic Party in Europe, in Germany, declare, I vote Merkel if you vote for me. So this is the system we will create in Europe. But the enormous progress is we involve for the first time citizens directly via the vote for the European Parliament in appointing the executive to which is accountable to the European Parliament. This is, in my eyes, an enormous step forward.
Thank you. I must involve more of the audience. The woman at number 60 in the yellow jacket.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Harayar Yadu. I come from Cyprus. I'm an international relations student at ULB and a volunteer at Vote Watch Europe. Hello. So I have two comments to make. The first one would be addressed to Mr. Schulz. When you say that...
Then it should be brief. If you're going to aim for two, you've got to be quick on both of them.
Yes, I promise. When you say that the only country in Europe that has a direct...
It was an error. Cyprus as well.
We're only 500,000, I know, but still. And the second one would be addressed to Mr. Barroso. With all due respect, but if you say that European democratic legitimacy is electing indirectly the President of the European Commission when the welfare state is collapsing in, I don't know, the whole periphery of Europe, I think there is a bit of misperception there. Thank you.
I'm going to group questions, so I'll come to you. No, the woman behind you. Yep.
Yes, thank you very much. We've been talking about lack of democracy for over an hour, and actually it's my personal opinion, but I'm addressing the whole audience here. For me, there's something that has been addressed before that. It's the lack of information. Like, even if there's lack of information, even if there are a lot of possible ways to have citizens involved more and more, people don't know how to be involved and how to go there. I did a project in a school last week. Half of the students were going to be 18 for the European elections. No one knew they could vote for the European elections. No one knew how to, etc. For me, it's one of the first things that has to be addressed. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a graduate student, and I'd like to follow that on directly. In the American presidential elections that just happened, they spent maybe $17 trillion on campaigns and advertising and so on. Everybody knew who Mitt Romney was and who Barack Obama was. If you ask the average European citizen, a student that doesn't study politics, they don't know the difference between the European Council and the Council of Europe. How much money are you going to spend on your campaign, and how do you know that someone in the middle of nowhere in the north of the UK who knows who you are?
Can I just check up with you? Do you think that spending in the States is a good thing?
Obviously, they've gone way over the top on the other side of the spectrum, but I think that getting citizens to know who they're voting for is a good thing. Whether you want to get money into politics is another question.
Number 59, please.
Just you, for over an hour, yes, you talk about the all election procedures, but to join the people who just speak before, you never speak about the citizens and the lack of people who are going to vote. I mean, in most of the countries, the European countries, there's like less than 30% of people who are going to vote. So.
Number 66.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to address Emily, Aurélie, sorry. The main thing that I've noticed from everybody here is that we're all trying to attempt the same thing. We're trying to find a solution for the citizens to become a member of Europe. And as a brand manager myself, my name is Wim Pryor. I believe that what the US does is not the way to go. You know, we should not spend big money on Euro brands and like make scarves with stars on them. We don't need them, right? But I think if we are going to spend some money on small things for smaller people and our citizens, why don't we try to be a European Union, and in general that's economically, not to point out politicians or anything, but economically the people need more money, right? They need more opportunities to create what they believe is Europe. We will not address them to say, this is Europe. No, let them choose themselves. What if they could create that we invent for them and spend our money on a system where they can create their own management of tasks, work together, have synergies within the cultures, have more labor flexibility within Europe, because they can take tasks, for example, from Belgium to Poland, from Poland to whatever. They can travel because they have cash and they have security on tasks and money. If we create a system that could help them to have more flexibility and to create what they believe, we will be more innovative. And innovation will lead, is one of the aspects of Europe 2020 and Creative Europe.
Number 70.
Hello, I'm from Romania.
Could you move the microphone a bit closer to you?
Yes, I'm from Romania. My name is Florina Noje. I was founder and executive president of the biggest syndicate for my region. That's why I should propose something that is very important for all our all European institutions and the European citizens. We used to talk about problems, but nobody thinks that it's much important to talk about solutions. We have to think why the European citizens lose faith in European institutions. And I think the most important thing is about communication. Is communication the thing that is missing when we don't when we lose faith in European institutions? Because I'm a nurse, I want to present something. If somebody is sick and we start to make investigation to find his disease, it takes much more longer if that person doesn't talk. For example, we see by his body language that he's in big suffer, but if he's not talking, it's very hard. If he's talking, we find very easy the diagnostic, so we can give the treatment. It's the same way between us, European citizens, and European Commission and the European Parliament. We should learn that we are two parts for communicate. If we communicate well, we will be more informed and we will control our future. Thank you.
Yes, good day. My name is Konrad Svenninger. I'm from Sweden, and I work with human rights for Soteria International. I want to speak about this aspect of trust, which is very much related to the living up to the mandate. And I would say go for having the actions that gives the fruits that actually give the trust of the individuals. And when we come to human rights, Europe now is very in a good direction, but has worked much more on policy than actually looking with the feet on the ground what is happening. Now, last week there was a resolution here actually to look into the member states that are de facto not respecting the Copenhagen criteria or living up to the Copenhagen criteria, and this is very important. We meet again and again this problem with the human rights being blatantly violated within the member states, and especially some of the new member states. What is happening today is that the EU is actually working against that. There is a refugee, Yogi, from Romania, who has been persecuted since the Ceausescu times. He has asylum in Sweden. It was given in 2007. Romania has 3 times asked him extradited, and Sweden defends him by the Geneva Convention. Now, as being a member of EU, Romania has posted the European arrest warrant, which ties the hands of Sweden, and the man is standing without defense because of EU policy. And this must stop, and it must, EU will have its legitimacy when they work for actually protecting the human rights against the state abuses that are still happening. Thank you very much.
Okay, question that, yes?
I'm Esther Solomon from the European Parents Association, and in this capacity I kind of represent a small minority of Europeans. If you include grandparents, I would guess it's about 60–70% of voters, which is, of course, not a minority. If we're talking about trust and we're talking about information, we should also include answers. And first of all, I want to welcome the fact that stakeholder involvement became part of official EU policy, and parents as stakeholders are involved in the preliminary decision-making process concerning children in all fields. But I want to raise actually two issues. One is that early school leaving, the prevention of early school leaving is a major issue in the EU. At the same time, it's there in the Charter of Basic Rights of the EU that it's mostly on parents, and it's also there in the Convention. And if I want to mobilize parents to go to vote, to find the party that they are voting for, we have to find the answers for the questions. How I, as a parent, will be supported, not financially, or not only financially, by EU politicians, by national politicians, in my goal, because for an everyday parent, the only important answer is what can I do, what the national government, what the EU institutions will do for my child. And they will be not interested in anything else. And if I may add one other idea.
You'll have to be very quick.
Very quickly.
One sentence.
Parents are quite young workforce, normally. And when I really respect national competences in education, you also have to think of the restrictive element in mobility, because there is a huge difference in school systems. And if you don't want to endanger your child, you are not mobile because you cannot move from one country to the other. Okay. And this is a question on my wish list, and that if I have an answer, I can mobilize parents. It's easy.
Next to you.
Hello, my name is Christine Neuhold from the University of Maastricht. I agree with Martin Schulz in the sense that this is already a step forward. I would not call it a revolution, but we will know at least different candidates and what they stand for. But I have a question. Why do the candidates come so late? You know, there has to be a large debate that we know actually what they stand for, who they are. We've been talking about information deficit, so I think there's still something to do there. And I have a very concrete question to Martin Schulz, as today is a wish list. What do you think should happen if the European Council does not buy what the European Parliament proposes, the candidate? Yeah? Thank you.
You make note of the specific question. There's a point there. Because I'm taking lots of questions, it's an obligation on you guys to be brief.
Yes, my name is Joep Omen. I work for the European Coalition of Citizens for Just and Effective Drug Policies. We are a citizens lobby group for about 20 years here in Brussels. When I hear Mr. Schulz and Mr. Barroso speak, I really hear the Brussels speech going over this whole problem. They talk about how politicians are voted and who will be voted, but they don't talk about what is the real cause of deficit of democracy. Mr. Can I speak? Or Mr. Yanukovych was another politician who were democratically elected. What is the real problem here? You can see it in the room. The majority of people who believe in the European Union are young people. They are idealists. They hope. When I was young, I also hoped. My parents also, they lived the war. But I lost that hope. You know why? What one of the things that really helped to create Europe was an Interrail ticket, where you could, when you were young, travel around Europe and communicate with a lot of people from around Europe. This did more for the European integration than European institutions. But what happened with the Interrail system? It was a cutaway because there was privatization of train, there was high-speed trains coming in. It was not affordable anymore for young people to travel around. I have a specific question on democratic deficit in the European Union. On drug policies, we have had civil society involvement. We have had a European Parliament report in 2004 saying what we need in drug policies. We have a European Commission evaluation from 2009 saying that we need evidence-based drug policies. And what happens? Nothing, because the European Union keeps behind its borders saying, well, we cannot do anything. We know all this is happening, but we still continue with the same policies as ever. This is really creating Euroscepticism and not the whole process of who or how people are going to be elected. If you don't understand this, then the consequence is that Europe will fail. And all these dreams of all these young people will crash. They will turn into a nightmare created by technocrats. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I turn to another young person. Yep.
I'm not so young, Michael Zwick, Forum for Language Rights and Cultural Diversity. We are speaking here about trust and how much citizens still have trust in the European integration process. So my question is not more information but more actions, more examples. How far, as Martin Schulz said, the person in the member countries are concerned. And so I don't know if Mr. Barroso or Mr. Schulz already got the ideas from their collaborators about starting with three confidence building measures. You can make it even before the European elections. I only cite everybody of us are angry about how consumers are treated in parking space. You decided we have a rooming legislation, but in the parking, for example, you have to pay every time 1 hour, and even if you're 10 minutes. So this is one. You can do this without any money. Or you can, for example, those who pay more, who pay immediately, you can say you have a discount. Costs nothing to the European Union. It only would provoke the big, say, companies, the credit companies, if you say, well, if you pay within 2 days or 48 hours, you have a right of a minimum discount. Or, for example, the question how far the person who are living in different regions, the information of using the original names in destinations. You have this in Belgium here, verified. Why the Commission cannot show that it's supporting the identities, the cultural identities, in saying, well, in the European Union, you use the official signs and of destination on road signs. This costs nothing, but it would show that the European Commission and the Parliament is supporting the individuality, the diversity of culture and languages. Why are you not doing this? It costs nothing, and you can do it confidential building measures. I don't know if you are informed about these.
Sir, I'm afraid I've cut your microphone because you're not accepting my hand signals, which is basically you've invited 3 confidence-building measures. They've heard the question. I'm coming to them soon. I'm going to take one last question from somebody who marvellously is directly in line with me and on the back row. And that's such a great achievement that you can have the last question in this round, sir.
Thank you. Etienne Kusch from the...
No. There's only one.
Who should speak now?
The person who's directly in line with me, and Madam, you're not.
I'm not.
Thank you. Etienne Kusch from the European Disability Forum, the organization that represents persons with disability in Europe. And there are 80 million, so it's not a small minority either. And a lot of them look at Europe with despair because austerity measures have created more exclusion and more poverty. So, and increase also the democratic deficit. So a question for Mr. Schulz, what will you do if you become President of the Commission to recreate a Europe more inclusive that cares for all its citizens? Thank you.
Good. We'll come to the tweet wall in a minute, but I'm going to turn to our 2 panellists now. Mr. Schulz, you've been given a sort of fairly rich, textured array of questions there. How do you respond? And there was a very specific question, but there was a specific question on the substance of policy. There was also a specific question about why the candidates are so late.
I try to answer to some of the principal concerns and lines expressed by the list of questions. First of all, when I came here, I thought we discussed about politics, but I'm a polite man, hosting as President of the Parliament this assembly. I have to answer to questions the moderator puts to me. If he prefers to discuss with me about institutional questions, I will not be impolite. Therefore, I answered. But I share your view. institutional questions and debates about institutional questions is the last thing Europe needs. Therefore, I'm very grateful, even if you compare me with Mr. Yanukovych. I'm grateful for the question. How to regain trust needs an analysis why we lost trust. I try to give you an example. I'm a post-war German. I present my excuses for that. I'm born at the western border of Germany, in the triangle Maastricht, Lüttich, Aachen, which is perhaps the most Europeanized region in Europe. I'm proud about that, and it's not shameful to live there. The other way around is a contribution to learn a lot about war, for example, and what borders mean for people. My family, my grandfather had 7 brothers. 4 of them went from Germany to the Netherlands and Belgium. The result was that the cousins, the sons of this family, were soldiers of 3 different armies. One of the reasons why I never ran for a national post, except mayor of my home city, but as a European parliamentarian. And I tell you why we lost trust. My parents, my father, for example, lived as your father 2 world wars. He was born 1912. My parents, after the Second World War, they were asked by the German government, as your parents by the Dutch government, I presume you are Dutch, or the Belgian government, or in France, in the United Kingdom, wherever. The post-war generation were asked from their governments to make sacrifices we cannot imagine today. Longer working time, lower salaries, no public services. I have 2 sisters and brothers. We were sent by my father was a small policeman who earned 1955 when I was born 250 euros. 500 Deutsche Mark. They paid for the school books, they paid for the school, they paid for the transport. My parents were 60 years when they had their first holidays. And why they made it without any complaint? Because the governments told them, and you are completely right, it is for your children. And visibly, it was for their children. My life, if I compare my life with the life of my parents didn't dare to dream about my life. Security, wealth, education, access to information, whatever. Our life. And now my generation is in office in Europe on a European level and on a national level. And now we are asking sacrifices to citizens. Lower salaries, longer working time, higher taxes, less services provided. And for what? To save banks. And their children are unemployed. This is why we lost trust. I stick to what we decided. We had to save the banking system to prevent the complete crash of our economy. But we cannot declare a bank as systematic relevant and the next generation is irrelevant. This is not possible. And therefore I think what we have to do, and this is my answer also to inclusive society, the most deprived people need the most support. If we introduce this principle, then we have already made an enormous step forward. For my feeling, to regain trust, we should not discuss about who votes whom, when, in which institutional frame. And here I must, even if he made a lot of errors in his political life, I must honor José Manuel Barroso, who together with me and other people made an enormous investment, political investment, in one thing: to put the fight against unemployment of young people to the first place of the political agenda of the European Union. I tell you why. Because this unemployment of the perhaps best educated generation our continent ever had in some of the member countries of the European Union, in some regions more than 50–60% unemployed. This hopelessness affects not only your generation, it affects also the parents who invested often whatever they had, their whole money, their whole commitment in the education of their children, and the society in which they are living answers, yeah, for your children we have no place. This is destroying the social basis, the cohesion of our society. And we can regain trust, I'm absolutely convinced, if we show we do concrete steps to bring your children to a job. We cannot employ everybody long life in the public services. That's not possible. But I give you a small example of what we could do. The biggest problem in some of the member states of the European Union is the credit crunch for small and middle enterprises. But small and middle enterprises, middle-sized enterprises, are those who create most of the new jobs. These are not the big industrial plants. These are the small and middle start-ups and small and middle enterprises. But they have in Spain, in Italy, in Portugal, in Greece, a big problem. They can't get credits because the banking system is a system in which banks can get for the time being for 0.25% money from the ECB, and they don't invest the money in real economy. By different reasons. Some of them, saved with taxpayers' monies, are now already once more speculating on international financial places, with cheap money making big efforts, but not investing in real economy. To overcome the credit crunch, and in my eyes, to combine the strategies against the credit crunch with the privilege for those enterprises who employ young people, with perhaps lower interest rates or a longer time of reimbursement. These are concrete steps, and I'm deeply convinced the moment people see national and European institutions are acting and putting this interest of citizens, of parents and their children at the first place, I'm absolutely convinced that we will regain trust. This is what I think we have to do.
Mr. Barroso.
I will also follow this issue about trust. It's true, there is today a crisis of trust or confidence in European institutions. But let's make a more deep analysis, not only in the European institutions. According to the survey of public opinion we have, for instance, just recently, in France there was a big research published by Le Monde. The European Union institutions were at a certain level, not good, but the national institutions of France were lower, and the national political parties much, much, much lower. The same can be said about Italy, for instance. Confidence in the parties is extremely low, and even in European national institutions compared to the European institutions. And I could multiply the example. In many countries, Central Eastern European countries, the same applies. There are some exceptions, for instance, Scandinavian countries. But generally speaking, there is a general crisis of confidence in the elites. People, the common citizen, feel that is far from those who take decisions, and that the decisions are not respecting the rights of people. This is a much more deep issue, and it's not, I think, intellectually correct to say it's just a problem with European institutions. There are problems with European institutions, and we can look at them as well. But if you want to understand the phenomenon, we should understand that this has to do more with the economic crisis and with unemployment. And we know historically that when there are very high levels of unemployment, we have all kinds of forces, populistic forces, sometimes xenophobic forces, extremist forces, ultranationalistic forces, and also some that are not like that, but they are simply becoming more and more sceptical. This is the reality. And by the way, the populism and so on is not only in Europe. If you look at the United States of America, if you look at Tea Party, we have the same phenomenon, and in other parts of the world. So this is not typically European. I want to make the point clear. But there is a crisis of confidence. Now, one of the points that aggravates the situation in Europe is because the national politicians, they have the temptation that was already identified and mentioned by Martin Schulz, that when things go well, it's their merit. When things go wrong, it's the fault of Brussels. They nationalise success and they Europeanise failure. And that is typically a problem that we have in Europe in terms of information, as some of you said, or communication. Yes, we have this problem. Because in a national system, when things are going badly, people can identify the government, and so on. In Europe, it's much more complex. Our system, by definition, is more complex, because we are now 28 democracies plus the European institutions. So it's more difficult to read, more difficult to understand, sometimes extremely complex. This is the issue, and we have to be honest about it. Now, a typical example of this is about the crisis. And now, for instance, our friend from Cyprus mentioned the European Union and the crisis of the welfare state. Who is responsible for the crisis in Europe? That's a good question to put. The crisis was created by the European institutions, or was it created by absolutely irresponsible financial behaviour in some parts of our financial sector? It was some completely irresponsible behaviour of banks. Some governments allowed their financial system to be 4 or 5 times the volume of their GDP. And that was done under the national responsibility, national supervision. There was not at all a political responsibility of Europe. Europe could not interfere. And other countries were spending too much. In fact, they were, these former generations, spending the money that your generation will not probably have available. So the crisis was a result of irresponsible practices in the public and private sector at national level. Either because the governments were spending too much and they created the sovereign debt, or because the national institutions like the supervisory authorities did not act against the irresponsible behaviour of the financial markets and banks in many of our countries. But today it's very popular to say that's because of Europe. They even say that's the euro responsibility. Completely false. The country, one of the countries most affected was Iceland, that is not a member of the European Union. The United States, in fact, the crisis started in the United States. Other countries that are not in the euro, like Latvia or Hungary and Romania, have suffered from the crisis as well. But it was very convenient for some that said this is because of the euro. I repeat, completely false. The crisis was not created by Europe. Europe is not the source of the problem. Europe is part of the solution. The crisis was provoked by irresponsible, in some cases criminal, behaviour of some people in the financial markets, and secondly also by lack of prudence in the management of many of our national public accounts, and in some cases even the governments were hiding the figures from the European institutions. In some cases they were manipulating the statistics, and so afterwards they say it's because of Europe. No, it's not because of Europe. Because of Europe, now we are able to create programmes to support the countries in more difficulties. Without those programmes, those countries could not finance themselves. They will be insolvent, or to use a less diplomatic word, they will be bankrupt. Without the support of the European countries, some of our member states will not be able to keep their welfare state as they have. To keep the state functioning. They could not have money to pay their public service, their public health, their education systems, not to speak about police or army. They will not have money. Some of them did not have the money to pay until the end of the year. And that's when the European institutions, together with member states, try to design some programmes of rescue to those countries. They were not perfect, of course not. They were painful. Yes, they were very painful. But we have to see why we have to go for that. And what was the cause of the crisis? And I think if you don't understand that, we'll keep on saying that it was the fault of the European Union, which I think is not fair. This is why I think most of you are young people. Please don't believe in myths and stereotypes. And the most common thing in Europe when we speak about Europe is myths and stereotypes. Putting all the time the blame in the European Union and so on. Of course, the European Union, as any human construction, is not perfect. There are many, many shortcomings. And now, after 10 years in the Commission, I can tell you I know them quite well. But if you don't like what's going on, do not blame in general the European Union, because the European Union is the biggest, most beautiful project ever in terms of international cooperation. We did never had in the history of mankind so many countries united in peace and freedom. Never happened. Before it was by force. This is the longest period of history in peace in Europe, at least Western Europe. Unfortunately, what we are seeing today in other parts, more eastern parts of Europe, is a matter of great concern. And let's speak about Ukraine. Those people that were by freezing temperatures waving the European flag, aspiring to come closer to the European Union, they have shown us in the European Union that we should be, at some extent, proud of what we have in the European Union, where we have open societies, when we have freedom, when we have probably built some of the most decent societies in the world, the most decent societies in the world, with human rights, rights of women, freedom of expression, freedoms in general, and of course some commitment for social cohesion, a welfare state and respect of our environment. So we should be proud about Europe and not be always complaining. Having said that, we should recognise there are problems, like our Swedish friend there mentioned, the problem about the lack of respect of the rule of law in some of our member states. We are acting today. We have launched not only have the CVMs for the cooperation verification mechanism, but the European Commission, when there were solid cases, we were acting against the lack of respect, including in our member states, on democracy and human rights. And we are now going to create a new system, a new instrument to fight with the non-respect of the principle of rule of law. So my appeal to you is the following. What you don't like in the European Union, please criticise, but don't turn your back on Europe. If you don't like it, improve it. Because, in fact, many of the points you have mentioned today are not directly the responsibility of Europe. You know that many member states speak, and it's in the treaty, of the principle, now I'm going to say one of those Brussels words, but I think it's important for you to know, subsidiarity. It means that those competences are at national level. Most competences in employment, education, health, public services are at national level. And in fact what we have been doing for these 10 years, and with the support of the European Parliament, is to have more instruments. The employment policy is a national responsibility, it's not a European responsibility. I have created in my first mandate, for instance, a fund for adjustment to globalisation. It means that people that go out of their companies because those companies had to lay off people, or they were closed, they can apply for some kind of subventions and help to reintegrate in the market. Or the European Social Fund. I had to fight very hard, by the way, once again with the support of the European Parliament, to keep that programme of aid to the most deprived people. I was in the European Council some years ago, and one of the members of the European Council was telling me, why is that? Programme for poor people? But that's not your responsibility. That's our national responsibility. And the person said afterwards, everyone should take care of its own poor. Not you at European level. Everyone should take care of his own poor. So, behind closed doors. And you know, it was, by the way, someone from your party, Martin. But okay. But the worst were even probably worse. I mean, I'm not making a partisan remark. But this is the reality, my dear friends. This is the reality. In many areas, what you've asked, you have made some suggestions about parking. Parking, I'm sorry to say, it's not European competence. We cannot make rules for all the parkings in Europe. I believe we should not do it. So this is the point. But in some areas, like social matters, we have been asking for more. The European Commission has fought for a more ambitious budget for research, for exchange of students, for mobility in Europe. We have fought for that. So my appeal to you is fight for these values, for more mobility. There are people now in Europe that are trying to put in question the freedom of movement. One of the greatest advances of civilization, that one person can go to another country to study, to work, to establish, to marry, or to divorce, but first to marry. That's one of the most important freedoms we have. But now some people are having the idea, no. Freedom of capital, yes. Freedom of goods, yes, but not freedom of people. But what is in the treaty, and what we commissioned in Parliament, I would say as well, we have been standing for, is freedom of movement. That's one of the great advances of European civilization, that we can be patriotic, we love our countries, but we have the idea that we have a citizenship that goes beyond our national citizenship. But of course, then criticise what is wrong. But please do not give up to prejudices and stereotypes that are now coming very fashionable because of the crisis we have been living. And it is with this conviction that I'm not going to run to the elections. So I'm going to tell you very frankly that it is why what I'm telling you is, as our clever moderator said from the beginning, I'm speaking with all independence. But based on my experience of 10 years in the Commission, and of course the experience I had before in my own country, I think what we have in Europe is very precious. If you don't like it, correct it, improve it. But please don't put it in question, because it's such an important and beautiful creation to have a union of countries that share basically the same values about freedom, democracy and peace. Thank you.
I always get worried. I'm not being a politician. I always get worried when I'm in a room when there's applause. I feel I certainly don't belong. I need to turn to Emily O'Reilly, the Ombudsman, to find out really what she makes of those responses that she's had to your questions. And I'd also like to get, I'm tempted to say that, of course, when she's presiding over this wish list, she is she's the sort of fairy godmother, really, of all these wish lists, except without really the ability to wave her wand and make them all come true. But anyway, what do you make of what you've heard?
Well, I think everybody in the room would probably have been impressed, well, not everybody perhaps, but judging from the applause, a great deal of people were impressed by the passion that both men have brought into articulating their views in relation to the diverse issues that were raised. The two gentlemen came in just as we were discussing the whole President of the Commission and how that individual is going to be appointed or elected at the end of the year. And I listened carefully to what both of them had to say. I think there is a slight divergence of view as to what is going to happen at the end, with Mr Barroso saying that it's slightly more complex than what some people think should happen. As I understood President Schulz, I think he was saying that because within the Council you have many, obviously the Council is represented within the two big groupings. As you said, I think you were the choice of a grouping that included 11 Prime Ministers and Presidents, and in Dublin later this week the candidate for the EPP will also be selected by members of the Council. And I think, if I understood what President Schulz was saying, he's saying, well, that is where the Council perhaps at this stage has its say, and that therefore they cannot say one thing at those venues and then turn around and do a sort of a backroom deal at the end when the European Parliament attempts to have its say. I think both gentlemen agreed that there is a crisis of confidence, that there is a democratic deficit, and they both gave their views as to who is responsible for this. I think President Schulz does see that this crisis of confidence and the democratic deficit, that part of the solution to this will lie in how the Commission President is chosen at the end of the year. And I suppose because he has said that so forcefully, and because he will be presumably such an important candidate, and one that will be put up to the electorate for selection, that does perhaps confirm and underscore what I and others said before they came in, that moment is going to be a critical one. But I think it is important from the viewpoint of the citizen that there is clarity during the European elections in relation to how the Commission President is going to be chosen. Because I know, for example, the Labour Party, which is the Socialist Party in Ireland, I know is very enthusiastic about your candidacy, and I think they are going to bring you around Ireland, and that you're going to be very much a part of their campaign. So at least Irish people will have a chance to see you and hopefully other candidates. Because, you know, if there is to be clarity and if that democratic deficit is to be reduced, then at the very least citizens have a right to know what the consequences of their votes are during the European elections. And I think that is the point that you were trying to make. There hasn't been that much talk about the Ukraine. I think the Ukraine crisis, in a very crude way, it is being sort of mediated or portrayed as a battle for hearts and minds, as between Europe and Russia, or the European Union and Russia, and that sort of crude equation, or the calculation that people in the Ukraine have to make, is between money on the part of Russia and a particular national identity, and democracy and the rule of law in relation to the European Union. And if the European Union, at the very least, can compete in relation to money, it has to compete in relation to democracy and law. And this year presents the European Union with an opportunity to burnish and show its democratic credentials, and how the European elections are conducted, the outcome of those elections, and then subsequently the election of the Commission President will feed into that. Finally, on a personal note, and President Schulz gave his very powerful telling of his family narrative with his own family, his grandparents and so on. I mean, I didn't have my family didn't suffer the tragedies that his people and other people did during the Second World War. But I was of the 1957 generation. I was born in 1957. I emerged from school in the 70s, and it was due to Ireland's accession to the EU in 1973 that enabled me and my generation of women to emerge from what was effectively a very authoritarian and misogynistic regime, which was the regime of the Irish state at that point, and that enabled me possibly to be here at this point in time, at this point in history. But that is my story. Each of us have our own story. The story would be very different from, say, somebody from Cyprus or from Greece, aged 18, emerging onto the jobs market and having a very different experience. Mine is positive, yours is positive, yours is positive, but there are many people for whom the European story is not positive, and that is the big challenge.
Mr. Schulz whispered in my ear. Mr. Schulz doesn't really whisper, but anyway, he let me know that he wanted to come back about the point about why candidates emerged late in the process, and I should let him do that.
Because the party, I don't know who raised the question.
It was the University of Maastricht who will be holding a debate between the candidates on what date is it? 28th of April. They're looking forward to welcome you there.
Ja, weiß ich nichts von. Also, ich bin aber auch hier.
Yes, I don't really know anything about that. I am here as President of the Parliament, not as a candidate. Now, if I was invited there, well, it's not very far for me to travel. Now, the political parties hesitated for a long time about whether or not to take this step. There was a lot of resistance amongst the political families. There were those who wanted the normal process. Perhaps they're the ones that have cut the lights here now. Oh well, it seems it's good night.
Might be about increasing the transparency of the Twitter wall, actually, but.
Also ich weiß jetzt nicht, warum das Licht ausgeht.
Okay, well I don't know what's happened there.
But the parties were very reluctant, and those members in the parties who were most reluctant, in my feeling, were those who wanted the process of the appointment of the President of the Commission to continue as it was always, as a deal of governments, and then the Parliament can say yes or no to the deal of governments. Instead, which is our wish, to involve first of all voters, and that was the reason why it came so late. But at the end, it came, and I think this is a good signal that people understand. This is not a. It was another question that to compare our system, for example, with the United States of America. The European Union is not a federal state. One may regret it or not, but it is a case. We are more than a not binding association of sovereign countries, but we are not a federal state. We are something in between. The President of the European Parliament has the privilege to make a choice in the fount of art here in the Parliament, and I had the privilege to make a choice to decorate my office. I have chosen a model of a Portuguese caravel from Bartolomeu Dias. You know it, it is in my office. Very good choice. Yeah. Bartolomeu Dias was one of these famous Portuguese sailors. I admire until today these people. They were perhaps the most courageous people we had in European history. And they sailed and they thought to find India. They were wrong. They didn't find India. But they find a new world. And on the way, they had storm and disasters, and they lost people, and they lost trust and hope. But they never gave up. And at the end, they created a new world. I think this is very symbolic, because we are exactly on that way. We don't know where the European Union will end. Not as a transnational model of the national state, not as a United States of America on a European territory. But wherever it should end, it needs a transnational democracy. If we transfer national sovereignty on a transnational level, but and this is our problem, we don't transfer the frame of the repartition of power between parliament, executive and juridical system in the same way on a transnational level, we create this lack of democratic responsibility and accountability. That's the reason why I insist so strong that we must repeat on a transnational level what we have learned on the national level in involving citizens. This is not easy, and it is a power game, because I will never forget the most impressive sentence I heard during my mandate 2009 to 2014. I heard in a speech of Nicolas Sarkozy in Brest, in Brittany, in the election campaign. I was there in the last row to listen what he said. Le gouvernement de l'Europe, c'est Angela.
And the government of Europe is Angela and me.
And the people applauded. And 3 minutes later he said, l'Europe est mal gouvernée.
Europe is badly governed.
But once more. Me too. That shows where we are and why I need that we have to strengthen the European Parliament voting the President of the Commission.
Now, there are all sorts of dangers at this point. I'm supposed to wrap up proceedings, but the atmosphere is now so relaxed and easy that Mr. Barroso now wants to say something, but he's going to have to say it very quickly.
Very quickly, just to call your attention to one thing. The Eurosceptic position. During all these 10 years, when I was going to the European Parliament, the leader of the Eurosceptics was saying to me, why are you there saying these things? You are an elected official. Even if I was elected by the European Parliament, to which he belongs. But look at now what is interesting. The Eurosceptic forces are exactly the ones who are not presenting candidates for the European Commission. So in fact, they on one side they say, you are a bureaucratic, technocratic institution, but when we decide to have elections for the President of the European Commission, as now it was decided, and I was one of those proposing it, they say, no. This is a kind of a caricature of a national state. We are not going to present candidates. You see? So it shows once again the intellectual dishonesty and political dishonesty of some of the criticisms made to the European Union. The same that accuse Europe of lack of transparency, lack of accountability, lack of democracy and the famous democratic deficit, when they have the opportunity to come with someone that goes for a vote at European level, they don't want it. Not only don't want it, they are putting in question the overall process. This is just an example of the myths and stereotypes and false ideas that circulate in Europe, to which I think we need to have a strong response. And I also believe, and I want to conclude with that whatever your personal position is, even if it is to say that we don't like any of the candidates, but you go to vote in European elections. Because as one of you said rightly, this is one of the problems. We don't have enough information, enough communication, enough public space for Europe debate, but the more of you go to the European elections, vote for the candidate of your preference. Martin, I can tell you one thing. If you use that image of the Portuguese sailors, you are going to be very popular in Portugal. You can make it go, it certainly help your vote there. But whatever your party is, or if you don't even have a party, please engage. Don't turn your back on Europe. Engage and participate. I thank you for your attention.
Okay. That leaves me with even less time in which to do two things. One is to apologise. I apologise to the folk in the Twitter sphere that I haven't involved enough in this debate. I invite you to check out the hashtag of EU wish list. I apologise that we haven't seen more on those wars. I apologise for not bringing you enough. I may apologise also for bringing dragging you through too much institutional stuff. That may be the journalist in me, which is still lurking somewhere. And the other thing I have to do is to thank you. Thank you for your active participation in this event, wherever you've been, and to thank our panellists, and to thank President Schulz, President Barroso, and the Ombudsman. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for. You are a good moderator. It's good to provoke the debate. That's not a problem.
Well, he did that.